Assalamualaikum everyone. I'd like to share with you this nature of conflict as part of our topic. So as introduction, you have a lot of knowledge about conflict, but here conflict is a relationship. Then conflict occurs between or at least two persons, groups, organizations, or nations. I think you know that one very well. Then during conflict situations, disagreements remain unsettled and relationships are strained. Emotions are high and tensions increases. Emotions also cloud the judgment of the protagonist. I think from your experience, you know this one when you talk about conflict situation. Then conflicting parties generally find themselves in disagreements over one or more four areas. So ito yung mga disagreements. When they talk about the facts, the present situation, the problem, then what about the goals? What should be done or accomplished? Then the methods. That's also one. The best way to accomplish the goals. Then the values, principles, qualities, and the concepts about what is desirable in a long term that influence judgment and perception about facts, goals, and methods. That's all about the conflicting parties generally find themselves in this disagreement about the facts, the goals, the methods, and the values. Then there are views of conflict. These views of conflict have evolved over time. One is the classical view. I think you have already an idea of this. Traditionally, conflict has been viewed as dysfunctional and unnecessary. That's more on the classical. Then the other one is more recently, another approach has emerged, the contemporary view. In this view, conflicts is seen as inevitable. So these are the two views of classical and contemporary. So in the previous discussion, I think there are three, but here there are two, the classical view as well as the contemporary views. So underlying the assumption about conflict, in the classical view, number one, conflict is avoidable, while on the other side, conflict is inevitable. Then the classical view, conflict is caused by management errors in designing or managing organizations, while on the other side, conflict arises from the conditions which are inherent in organizations, competitions for limited rewards, and goal differences, and so on. That's more on the contemporary view. Then another thing is, in the classical view, conflict results from breakdown in communication and a lack of trust and understanding between individuals and the groups. That's a classical. While the contemporary, conflict results from individuals and groups' differences, such as those of education, training, and experience. Then in the classical view, the next is conflict disrupts operations and prevents optimal performance, while the contemporary view, conflict enhances and inhibits organizational performance in varying degrees. So another is, in the classical view, optical organization performance requires the removal of conflict. That's classical. While here in the contemporary view, optimal organization requires a moderate level of conflict. Then with this assumption, the task of management is to manage the level of conflict and its resolution for optimal performance. That's more on the contemporary views. While the classical views, with this assumption, the task of management is to eliminate conflict. So now you know the difference between classical as well as the contemporary view when we talk about conflict. So what about the conflict outcomes? The conflict can have both destructive and constructive outcomes for the organization. I think you would agree with that. James A.F. Stoller suggests that the net impact of conflict in organizational performance depends on three factors. The first factor is the level conflict. Either too much or too little conflict is good for the organization. The second factor is organizational structure and the climate. The flexibility of the organizational structure and climate also determines the conflict outcomes. So that's all about the levels or the factors when we talk about the organizational conflict. The number three, how conflict is managed. Manager skills in the conflict diagnosis the management will largely influence which outcomes eventually occurs, and the skills following include the following. So it's now the work of the manager. First is the ability to diagnose the nature and sources of conflict. So yung trabaho niya. Then the ability to initiate confrontation and discussion with the conflicting parties. Then the ability to engage in active listening so far to hear all points of view. So yun, the active listening, that's one of the manager's skills. Then the ability to choose the right approach towards the conflict resolution. Then what about the benefits of conflict? So in the previous discussion, of course, there is a positive and the negative result of conflict. But here is the benefits. The development of energy and enthusiasm. That's the number one. The conflict is energizing. Faced with opposition, people seek new or higher levels of achievement. So yan yung benefits sa development of energy and enthusiasm. Then the diagnostic value. Conflict has diagnostic value. Conflict provides a means for early detection of problems before they get out of hand. That's the second benefits. Then the third, generations of new and creative solutions. Conflict triggers a search for new and creative solutions to problem. So that's why conflict, it can be positive and it can be also negative because of these benefits. Generation of the new and creative solutions. Then what about the cost of conflict? Of course, number one is tension and anxiety. That's the cost of conflict, number one. Conflict induces tensions and anxiety. When protagonists try to outdo each other, there's always the possibility of losing. The second, cost of conflict. Real causes of conflict may overlook or ignored. While conflict reflects symptoms, there is a risk that the underlying causes may be glossed over. The number three cause of conflict is rigidity in position. People disputes may become more rigid in holding on to their positions rather than becoming more flexible. So may mga ganon, mga sakim sa posisyon. So that's one of the cause of conflict. Number four is decline in cooperation and teamwork. So diyan din yung mapapala. Decline in cooperation and teamwork. Conflict can dull the need for cooperation and teamwork with other parties. Instead, the protagonist may concentrate on the facing the other party. So yan, the decline of cooperation and teamwork. Then the loss of self-esteem. Conflict can result in loss of self-esteem. This is true when results do not quite measure up to expectation. So that's the number five cost of conflict, the loss of self-esteem. So there are sources of intergroup conflict. I think in the previous presentation, you know this one, but this is just maybe a review. The dimensions of interdepartmental relationship, from the environmental to intergroup conflict, like the differences in goal, the task independence, the resources interdependence, incentive and reward system, that can be one of the source of conflict, the task ambiguity, the differences of personal background and traits, Then the reverse is power and status, and a lot more in the previous topic when we talk about the sources of conflict. Here is more on inter-group conflict. Then the conflict resolution strategies. So number one, take note on this conflict resolution strategies. The use of authority. An executive may opt to impose a solution to resolve or suppress conflict by invoking higher authority. So I think that's self-explanatory. Kung hindi makaya, use the higher authority if there is conflict. Then avoidance, you know this one very well. To resolve conflict, a manager may choose to separate the contending parties away from each other. So that's avoidance. Then number 3, smoothing. Smoothing over the conflict is another method that can be used by the manager. So that's one of the strategies in conflict resolution. Number 5, compromising. I think nadaanan the style, alam na niyo ito. Conflict may be resolved through face-to-face negotiation between the protagonist. Then problem solving. In a problem-solving conflict, and the protagonist meet and discuss problems and issues related to the conflict. Para walang problema, ma-resolve. That's a strategy. Then the third party mediation. The consultant is invited to mediate the conflict. Like for example here, mga rido-rido natin, di ba, may mga third party na mga mediator para ma-resolve yung conflict on land, conflict of maratabat, and etc. Then the intergroup training. So kailangan din ito. Intergroup training as a means of resolving conflicts and gain prominence over the years. So maganda din pag may training. Then conflict prevention strategy. So we can prevent also conflict. First is the emphasis on the total organizational effectiveness. This should be stressed so that departmental goals do not become only ones to be pursued. So emphasis on the total organizational effectiveness. Second, conflict prevention strategies, communication among the groups. So communication is very, very important. This should prevent misperception about the intentions, skills, and the traits of other groups. So communication. Then rotation of members. This promotes mutual understanding. That's one of the prevention. Then, avoiding the win-lose situation. Dapat win-win. Alam natin yon. Ultimately, this will only force one group to be a loser. Kung may nanalo, may natalo. Dapat we will go to the win-win solution or situation. So that's all about the nature of conflict. So with that, I hope you learned something. And please take note and study this one. And this is part of your final examination. Thank you very much. God bless everyone. Dalaygo ng Diyos. This is your friend, Brother JoArs Alferez.